She was just a maid in a wealthy household, unseen, unheard, invisible. To them, she was nothing more than the help. But one night, under the glow of chandeliers and music, she was forced into a cruel game. A challenge meant to humiliate her. A waltz, in front of guests who laughed, mocked, and waited for her to fail. What they didn't know, she carried a secret that could shatter their arrogance and rewrite her fate. When the music started, history was about to be made. The question is, were they ready to face the truth? By day, the mansion sparkled with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the laughter of those who never worried about money. But in the shadows of those grand halls, Evelyn moved quietly, her presence almost invisible. She was the maid, her footsteps soft, her hands always working, her face rarely acknowledged. To the wealthy family she served, she was simply the help. Yet beneath her calm exterior lived a woman with stories untold, dreams unspoken, and a strength no one cared to see. Evelyn was no stranger to hard work. She had grown up in a small town where opportunities were scarce, and being black meant every door opened slower, if it opened at all. Cleaning, cooking, scrubbing floors, these were the jobs society had reserved for her. And though she carried herself with dignity, the sting of being looked down upon was constant, like a shadow that followed her everywhere. Still, she endured. For Evelyn, survival wasn't about recognition. It was about resilience. The mansion was its own world, lavish parties, designer clothes, endless champagne. Evelyn watched silently as wealth dripped from every corner of the estate. She was the one who prepared the ballroom for nights of elegance, arranging silverware, polishing glasses, making sure everything sparkled. But when the guests arrived, she became invisible again, fading into the background as if her labor had no face. They didn't see her exhaustion. They didn't see the woman. They only saw the uniform. Yet, hidden within Evelyn's heart was something no one suspected. A passion that once defined her life. Years before scrubbing floors and folding linens, she had been on stages, in front of lights, in the center of crowds. Evelyn had been a dancer, a champion, graceful and unstoppable. The rhythm of music was in her bones, the elegance of movement in her soul. But time, poverty, and prejudice had stolen that dream away, leaving her to bury it beneath the weight of survival. Still, sometimes, when the house was quiet and the halls empty, she would hum softly to herself, letting her body sway ever so slightly. A whisper of who she used to be, a reminder of a life that could have been. She never thought anyone would notice. She never thought that past would ever matter again. But whispers traveled faster than truth. And in that mansion, whispers about Evelyn began to stir. The wealthy matriarch of the household, a woman who prided herself on class and status, had caught wind of Evelyn's past. To her, it wasn't inspiring, it was laughable. How dare the maid, a black woman at that, believe she once belonged on stages where only the privileged danced? To the matriarch, Evelyn's story wasn't one of triumph, it was a joke waiting to be exposed. And so, the trap was set. At an upcoming grand ball, with guests gathered from the highest rungs of society, Evelyn would be given a chance. But it wasn't an opportunity, it was a performance meant to humiliate. The matriarch planned to make her dance, not as a guest of honor, but as a spectacle. A cruel challenge, disguised as entertainment. For Evelyn, the nights leading up to the ball were heavy with unease. She didn't know the full extent of what awaited her, but she felt it, the tension, the sneers, the lingering stares. She had learned long ago that when the wealthy smiled too sweetly, it was rarely out of kindness. Something was coming, something she could not yet see. What Evelyn didn't realize was that the very thing they hoped would break her would instead awaken a part of her she thought she had lost forever. The night of the ball arrived like a storm. Evelyn had been bracing for it but couldn't escape. The mansion gleamed brighter than ever, its windows spilling golden light across the estate. Inside, the ballroom was alive with music, polished shoes gliding across marble floors, and champagne bubbling like liquid gold. Guests draped in silk and diamonds filled the room, their laughter echoing under glittering chandeliers. For them, this was another evening of indulgence. For Evelyn, It was a stage she never asked for, a stage prepared to swallow her whole. She had spent the day serving tirelessly, making sure every candle was lit, every glass filled, every plate perfect. And still, as the night unfolded, she could feel eyes lingering on her. Not the usual quick glances, but long, deliberate stares, the kind that said she wasn't just a maid tonight. She was something else, something to be put on display. When the music softened and the matriarch's voice rang out, silence rippled through the crowd. Evelyn froze, tray in hand, her heart thundering in her chest. The woman of the house raised her glass, her smile sharp and glistening. "Tonight," she announced, "we have a very special surprise." All eyes turned to Evelyn. Her stomach twisted. She knew in that instant that whatever came next wasn't meant to honor her. It was meant to break her. The matriarch's words sliced through the air. "Our dear maid once fancied herself a dancer." Imagine that. A maid dreaming of the stage. So tonight, let's see if she can still keep up with the rhythm. Laughter rippled through the guests, cruel and mocking. Some clapped, others smirked, waiting for the spectacle to begin. Evelyn felt her cheeks burn, humiliation wrapping around her like chains. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into the shadows where she usually lived. But the spotlight was fixed firmly on her now, and every exit seemed sealed by the weight of their stares. A polished floor that once carried only her mop now threatened to swallow her pride whole. The music swelled again. A waltz, elegant, deliberate, merciless. A young man, smug, arrogant, hand-picked for the task, stepped forward. He was the matriarch's son, tall and entitled, grinning as if this were the easiest game of his life. He bowed with exaggerated mockery, extending his hand toward Evelyn. "Shall we?" he sneered. Gasps and chuckles filled the room. Her hands trembled. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run. But refusal meant ridicule that would follow her long after this night. So, with a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. The room erupted in applause, not in admiration, but in anticipation of her failure. As the dance began, Evelyn's body betrayed her. Her steps were stiff, her mind clouded with fear. The sun pulled her harshly, guiding her in jerks and jolts. That drew laughter from the crowd. She could hear whispers, cruel jokes about the maid who thought she could dance, each word pierced deeper, each laugh heavy with the venom of prejudice. She wasn't being tested as a dancer, she was being punished for daring to exist in their world. The humiliation grew unbearable. Her heart pounded as if trying to escape her chest. She stumbled once, catching herself, and the crowd roared with delight, as though her pain were the evening's entertainment. For them, this wasn't just a dance, it was a reminder of where she belonged. But deep inside, something stirred. With every cruel laugh, with every mocking glance, the years of buried passion and discipline whispered louder. She remembered the stages she once owned, the trophies she once held, the applause that was once hers. The rhythm in the music wasn't foreign, it was home. And for the first time in years, she let herself hear it. The matriarch leaned back in her chair, sipping her champagne, certain of Evelyn's collapse. But Evelyn's eyes shifted, no longer wide with fear, but steady, sharp, alive. Her movements began to change. Her steps grew lighter, her body looser. She was no longer just surviving the waltz, she was beginning to claim it. And as the crowd leaned forward, expecting disaster, they were about to witness something no one had prepared for. The ballroom fell into a hush. What had started as mockery was shifting into something none of them could quite name. Evelyn's body, once stiff with fear, now moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. Her steps found rhythm, her hands carved elegance through the air. Her posture carried power no servant's uniform could erase. This was no longer a maid stumbling through humiliation. This was a champion reclaiming her crown. The son tried to keep up, but it was clear he was no match for her. His smirk faltered as her movements outshone his, her presence pulling the room into her orbit. With every turn, every rise and fall, she drew the crowd into silence. Laughter died on their lips. The only sound that remained was the sweep of her dress across the marble and the haunting strings of the orchestra. But just as awe began to replace mockery, the matriarch's face hardened. To her, this wasn't triumph, it was defiance. A maid, a black maid, outshining her son in front of their guests. It was unthinkable. Her voice, sharp as glass, cut through the music. Enough. The orchestra faltered, instruments stumbling to a halt. Evelyn stopped mid-step, chest rising and falling, sweat glistening on her brow. For a heartbeat, the room seemed suspended. In time, the matriarch rose, her gown trailing behind her, her eyes burning with rage. "This is not your stage," she hissed, her words carrying across the stunned silence. "Know your place." Gasps scattered through the crowd, but no one spoke. The guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between fascination and fear of the woman who controlled their invitations, their standing, their world. Evelyn stood frozen, her pride battling against the weight of humiliation pressing down once more. For a moment, it seemed she might bow her head, retreat into the shadows as she had always done, but then something in her refused. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her chin, her eyes locked with the matriarch's, no longer trembling, no longer pleading. Her voice, steady and resonant, broke the silence. "This is my place. Anywhere music lives, anywhere dignity survives, I belong." It was not shouted, but the force of it reverberated through the walls. The crowd erupted not in laughter, but in stunned applause. Some clapped hesitantly, others with a fever that grew louder, stronger, unstoppable. For the first time, they were not mocking her, they were honoring her. The matriarch's face twisted with fury. She raised a hand to silence them, but the sound only swelled. Guests rose from their seats, drawn to the power they could no longer ignore. And Evelyn, still standing tall in her maid's uniform, still glistening from the dance, looked like she had never belonged anywhere else more than she did in that spotlight. The son, humiliated and flushed, stepped back, his arrogance crumbling. His attempt to mock her had turned into his own undoing. His clumsy steps were forgotten, overshadowed entirely by the brilliance of the woman he had tried to embarrass. But even as the applause shook the chandeliers, Evelyn knew this moment carried more than pride. It was dangerous. To stand, to shine, to refuse the place they tried to confine her to, this was rebellion. And rebellion, especially for someone like her, came with consequences. Still, she did not waver. She placed her hand on her chest, bowed not to the matriarch, but to the music, to herself, to the dignity she had reclaimed. And as the orchestra, moved by something greater than instruction, picked up the waltz again, Evelyn turned once more to the floor. This time, she danced not because she was forced, but because she chose to. And in that choice, she declared something the entire room would never forget. The question that lingered, heavy in the air, was this: would the world beyond those glittering walls ever allow her that same freedom, or would it crush her again the moment the music stopped? When the last note of the waltz faded into silence, the ballroom no longer belonged to the wealthy family or their guests. It belonged to Evelyn. She stood at the center, her breathing heavy, her heart racing, but her spirit unbroken. For a fleeting moment, the applause carried her higher than any stage ever had. But as quickly as it came, reality crept back in. The matriarch's glare was colder than stone, her lips pressed into a line that promised consequences. Evelyn knew the weight of defiance she had carried it her whole life. The guests would remember that night not for the son's performance, not for the elegance of the ball, but for the maid who refused to break. Some whispered that she was extraordinary. Others whispered that she was dangerous. And in a world built on hierarchy and prejudice, being dangerous was never safe. The next morning, Evelyn's uniform felt heavier than ever. The mansion had returned to its usual rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Yet she noticed the difference in how they looked at her now. The staff eyed her with a quiet awe, but the family treated her with sharp, clipped coldness. Her days became lonelier, her work scrutinized more harshly, her presence tolerated but never forgotten. Still, Evelyn walked with her head held higher, because she knew something had changed, something no one could take from her. They had tried to strip her of dignity, to make her a spectacle, but instead, they had revealed her strength to the world, and most importantly to herself. For Evelyn, The dance was more than defiance. It was a reclamation. It was proof that no matter how deeply society tried to bury her talents, her voice, her worth, she carried them still. That night, she had stood before the very people who sought to shame her, and instead, she forced them to see her humanity. But here is the truth. Evelyn's story is not hers alone. It echoes through history, through generations of Black women and men who were forced into roles society dictated, denied opportunities their talent and brilliance deserved, and punished for daring to shine where they weren't supposed to. Her story is the quiet echo of countless maids, laborers, sharecroppers, and dreamers whose gifts were dismissed because of the color of their skin, and while Evelyn's moment in the ballroom ended in applause, the world outside those glittering walls was less forgiving. Too often, triumphs like hers are met with punishment instead of progress. Too often, dignity must be defended in the face of cruelty that should never exist in the first place. Evelyn didn't become rich. She didn't rise to power in that mansion. But she carried something far more important out of that night. Proof that truth cannot be erased, even when silenced, even when mocked. Her dance was not just movement, it was resistance. And resistance leaves ripples that travel farther than anyone can see. So what do we take from Evelyn's story? That racism is not always a shouted insult or an open door slammed shut. Sometimes it hides in laughter meant to humiliate, in opportunities dangled only to be snatched away, in systems that force brilliance into the shadows. And yet even in those shadows dignity can shine. Evelyn's Waltz reminds us that racism tries to define limits, but humanity pushes back. It forces us to ask, how many more Evelyns will be mocked, underestimated, or broken before we finally learn? How many more times must talent be hidden and dignity fought for before society accepts what should have been true all along, that every person deserves to be seen, respected, and free? This was not just her dance. It is our lesson. The question is, will we listen? Or will the music fade, only for history to repeat itself again?